I'm going to regret this.
Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
That's right, it's Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast that is beamed out each and every week with new explorations of all of the nooks and crannies of the Star Wars galaxy. I am one of your humble hosts, John Mills, and I am joined by my dear friend and esteemed Jedi Master with another surprise topic, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Matt, welcome back to your usual seat here at our little mini Jedi Council chamber table.
Well, it's so good to be back. It's quite a comfortable chair here. It's a cross between Obi-Wan's chair from the council and Yoda's chair, and it's just really cushy. I feel like this fine Reikian leather chair here is just it feels really good. You know, it's strangely softer than you would think it would be.
Well, you know what? I decided to go with the traditional Jedi Council chair, which is in fact filled with water. And that's why it is so supportive and comfortable at the same time. Very difficult to get out of, though. Yeah.
Yes, this is true. The waterbed chair. Yes, I forgot about those. So.
It's very comfy, very comfy. But, you know, what is also very comfy is going up and just hitting that subscribe button on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You're here, you're listening. Go ahead and follow us in both places. It helps the show grow, helps people find it in their searches and everything like that. And of course, if you're so inclined and you have not yet taken the opportunity, go ahead and leave us a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate both of those things. But here's the surprise topic for tonight, because we spent a lot of time talking about the prequels because prequels are freaking fantastic. We've talked a lot about the original trilogy. Who doesn't love the original trilogy? And sometimes we don't talk a whole lot about the sequel trilogy. But one of the things that people do talk about the sequel trilogy is some disappointment about history of characters, stuff like that. I mean, how many years later are we? And we haven't even gotten a book attempting an explanation of Snoke. I mean, unless there's something I've missed.
Yeah.
And there were hints when Force Awakens came out that Lawrence Kasdan sat there and said, "Oh, he's got a history. You just haven't seen it yet." I'm like, okay, well, there's a history. Since we haven't gotten that history, all that we've gotten is what we've all sort of affectionately made the occasional joke about, that Snoke was a clone of someone somewhere along the lines. And we saw other Snoke clones in vats on not Malachor in The Rise of Skywalker. So I want to sit here. I want to brainstorm. I want to say we're longtime Star Wars fans. We love to get in there. We love to get into the nitty gritty. You know, if somebody were to say to you, you know, what history of Snoke would be interesting to you, Matt? Where would you see this character? Where would you see Snoke having been discovered, and by whom, in the course of this history we haven't gotten? How old was he? Where did the dark side first make him apparent to either Palpatine or Vader or whomever else over time?
You know, I think that's a really interesting question, and definitely out of left field, because I did not expect that. And, you know, the first thought that actually came to my mind is that he would be a character who would have been discovered by Palpatine, and that he would have been a character that Palpatine actually kept in secret on... What's the name of that stupid planet from The Rise of Skywalker?
I've just always called it not Malachor. It's Exegol.
That he would have been a person that would have been actually kept on Exegol, and maybe been somebody that was strong in the Force, obviously, and somebody that Palpatine would have trusted with those secrets, and that his job would have been to work on the cloning project, and in some ways, much like the character Dr. Hemlock that we saw in the Bad Batch, but a force-sensitive scientist whose goal was to continue that work. And then I think what would make it interesting is that one of the reasons that he's deformed is because of the experiments that he has done on himself, dark side and otherwise, to try and advance the cloning science to the point where you could clone a Force user the way that Palpatine wants it to be done. And so that's just the first thing that just kind of pops into my head, and which, when you think about it, would be an incredibly fascinating story. I mean, did Palpatine already know about Exegol? Did they have to go search for it together? There's so many possibilities in that my head actually kind of explodes with the amount of possibilities of storytelling that you could do with those two characters.
I love everywhere you went with that. I really do. I think the cloning tech definitely comes into it. I still hold on to my pet theory, backed by nothing but what I wish, which is that he is the product of an attempt to combine Palpatine DNA with Kaminoan DNA. Because there's that episode in Bad Batch where they go off and there are those lost cloning chambers, and they're doing some sort of cloning experiment, but the figure inside is a little over large, but there was something about the figure that reminded me of Snoke. I am not saying there's any intent. I'm saying that's just where my brain went with it. And obviously we've gotten sort of a hint in season 2 of The Mandalorian where they happened across what looked to be a cloning chamber, and there was a Snoke theme that seemed to be playing in the background when they were staring at it. And if I remember correctly, it's the infamous episode where they later had to go back and erase the half a crew member that you could see in one of the shots.
I think you're right, yeah.
I think that was the episode. It sort of stole the thunder of the conversation, as it were. But I think that where I went with it originally was that he was Vader's secret apprentice. And then the Emperor took him out when Vader made a play for power, or the Emperor discovered him and tried to get rid of him the way that he had, or he told Vader to get rid of him the way that he told Dooku to get rid of Ventress. But I really like your idea that he would have been involved in some sort of dark magic cloning stuff, because that's the famous line. It's like, Sith magic cloning technology, right? Okay. So maybe he was tied to that, and Vader was trying to woo him to be an apprentice to get himself restored. And then Palpatine, being who he was, stole him from Vader, or there was some sort of fight involved. So that's where I would layer in Vader and Palpatine, and Vader would not have known that Snoke was then brought back to life, as it were. But I want to pick at that one. Do you think it's possible that the Snoke we encountered, obviously, we don't know whether he was a clone or whether he was the original or what have you, but wouldn't it be interesting if when they hit a reset button on Snoke, it was basically a new being? The failure of his attempt was there was no successful transfer of consciousness from one physical body to the next.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if I understand what you're saying is then, there have been like multiple Snokes that almost, is it like they almost kind of start over, or is there like a baseline for them?
That's what I haven't thought far enough about. What do you think makes the most sense?
It would be interesting almost that there was kind of this baseline that they could never get past a certain point, with the transfer. It's like you could, you could kind of like half a transfer and then it just stalls out almost.
The bandwidth, too much bandwidth.
Yeah, exactly. The force bandwidth is not strong enough. But and so that's what would make it interesting then when you think about this idea of them trying to do this, and maybe there's an original Snoke, right? But they've tried this with others and they've just had to kill them because the it's almost like the Prestige, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Thing.
Ooh, I love that poll. I love that poll.
But like you said, that there's something that's wrong with the transfer, and we're making a joke about this idea of the bandwidth, but that's why they go and search for the hidden world of Exegol, where the Force Nexus power of the dark side is the strongest, and that's what allows them to finally get to the point where they could do what they do with Palpatine. And it was only at that point, because it's the only place that it semi-works, right? Like, because we know from the Rise of Skywalker, it's not completely successful because Palpatine is this, kind of half there rotting corpse, not fully completely formed. He doesn't have quite his full power. And that's the whole point of wanting to, draw Ben and Rey there, because he can suck the force of the dyad from them that allows him to become the fully fleshed out version of himself. And that's what I think the idea, obviously, of like bringing back Palpatine was something they did in the comics.
Oh, yes.
And this whole idea, and of course they played with cloning, of course, in the original Thrawn trilogy, right? You have Luke and all these things. And I think the idea isn't bad. It really just came down to the execution. And a big part of that is because, if you're going to do that, this type of story does feel like it really requires, as we're talking about, what would be the nitty gritty for the character of Snoke and the character of Palpatine and how all this comes to be. I mean, it does feel like you do need a lot of legwork to be able to get to a place where you can make that story make sense, but you can do it, right? I mean, you could absolutely do it, but you would have had to, I almost feel like, reveal that from, that mystery starts in what we know as The Force Awakens, and then has to continue throughout the rest of the series. And so, but that, when I think about the whole idea of like what we did with cloning and the Clone Wars, and of course Attack of the Clones and everything like that, and then what the EU kind of played with cloning and all of that, there really is a place for this to happen, because obviously we played with it in The Mandalorian too, of this whole idea of, Moff Gideon's desire to be able to create force ability in himself.
Yeah.
And that's what he wanted most was to be able to bond, the midichlorians at a higher content rate, so that, he could be force sensitive, and obviously he's not able to make that happen, but that's what he wanted, Grogu for, and so, maybe this will be one of those things, and as we know, the Mandalorian Grogu's coming out, and we've got all this stuff that's going to be happening with Ahsoka and all, and maybe all this is kind of a way to do exactly what we're talking about, which is to make the story of the sequels, in that sense, make sense, right? That we're going to write what I'm talking about, all that legwork, so that when you watch that film, maybe it's like, okay, now that actually makes more sense.
And the thing is, I've always been perfectly happy with the one-shot villain, where it's like they come and they go. I almost think that I would have been better with Snoke if he had just died in The Force Awakens. Grievous comes and goes in one film. Tarkin comes and goes in one film. I would have been fine with Snoke coming and going in one film, and I would have always been curious, but I wouldn't have been, as lack of a better term, I wouldn't have been as annoyed as the way that it went. But let me actually just posit this as one last sort of way to look at it, because I think we're pretty much on the same things. Like, there was some sort of brilliant science going on, war for Snoke between Vader and Palpatine. and we have the Moff Gideon angle. What if, and I'll throw this idea out there, what if Snoke was not simply, that's, I'm not saying that to be dismissive.
Right.
What if Snoke was a character who was like a brilliant military strategist or weapons maker, and they volunteered him, or he volunteered to have the Moff Gideon thing happen to him. So he has a history just as a regular old person in the original trilogy timeline. He survives as part of the Imperial remnant, and he falls in somehow with Gideon or the Secret Emperor or what have you. But the thing is, that leaves what's his association with Vader then? Because he has an obsession with Vader, as like, it's not just Kylo Ren that has the obsession with Vader, but do you think that that is a possibility, that like he was one of Vader's trusted lieutenants or generals in that case, and was given the opportunity? Do you want power like I have? There's a crazy experiment we can do. Are you willing to take the risk? And that's why he winds up deformed. Like, it winds up messing with him, but at the same time giving him what appears to be, based on what we see on screen in The Last Jedi, incredible power.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that works for the character to help explain, why the character has the abilities that he does, and why he does seem to be so strong, and in some ways, make him a force to be reckoned with then in the series, and makes him kind of terrifying. It's interesting that for the series, one of the things that ends up happening is that Snoke becomes kind of a combination of Vader and Palpatine, and in the sense that his same foibles, right, are the same things that lead to their downfall, right? Their hubris and all that kind of stuff, which is very interesting. So,
what if he's a product of them doing an experiment using Vader's blood for the M count, and that's why Vader is so so baseline powerful. His antenna's broken. He just needs a new body to live in. So they do the transfer to somebody who's willing to undergo the experiment, but it's so powerful that it winds up making Snoke look and function the way that he does physically. I guess that's a possibility too. Unfortunately, nobody seems to want to take a crack at explaining any of that to us, so we'll just have to sit here and ponder. But at the very least, I think we can agree that it is something that we can ponder, regardless of anything else. And someday, I legitimately hope someday we get that explanation, because some attempt at it in some source material, I really think needs to be made.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have. I mean, as we're talking about it here, I think you can see, if you're listening to this, there are just so many interesting avenues that you could go down to help understand this character and his place in the galaxy, his connection with, Palpatine and Vader and all these different things. And, I think the whole idea of even just what it is that, because this is the thing that the Bad Batch does, right, is that it does really help build into that mystery of exactly how and what Palpatine is trying to do, with these Force-sensitive children and all of this type of stuff, building into that idea of what we got in the sequels. And so I think what that shows is that this storyline itself is kind of rife with great opportunities. And deep and interesting opportunities to explore the mythos of the Star Wars universe, and especially the mythos of the Sith in that way too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the one last question then is, if they have a great backstory for Snoke that they roll out, will that help you enjoy the entire sequel trilogy more? Will it give you something that you can take into it? Because there are always things where the outside source material can help. ameliorate some of the issues you might have. If they roll out a great backstory for Snoke, does that open your heart to the sequel trilogy a little more?
I think it's something that could absolutely help. I don't really know that it could make it worse in that sense, unless it becomes one of those things where, it gives you that feeling as you're watching it. Oh my gosh, this is so great. I wish that then the thought process for those 3 films then was so much more cohesive to allow all of this to actually flow even better. So I think it's probably going to actually be a combination of the two, right? It's going to leave you feeling like, oh, that makes more sense, but it's also going to make you think the same thing that, we as fans have really been kind of thinking this whole time, which is just, I wish there was more cohesion for this storyline, in the sense that from start to finish, somebody had really looked and said, okay, what are the puzzle pieces that we need to make everything fit together well? And in part of that is you kind of need to understand what the whole of the picture is before you can break it down into the puzzle pieces. So, this is basically trying to add to the puzzle after the fact, after you have the picture. And that is always, I think, going to be a slightly more Frankenstein's monster type of approach to storytelling than it would be otherwise if you had just, started with a good picture from the beginning.
But at the very least, we can feel like we're in the writer's room as something is developing, and maybe at the end it all becomes magical because they figure out how to make it work. We got to be open to the idea of it, no matter what the odds are,
I mean, as that other franchise would say, there are always possibilities.
Or as Han Solo would say, never tell me the odds. But what I do want you to tell me is where people can find you online.
Yeah, you can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, here on the network in Owl Post, talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. That's a completed show, so you can enjoy that now. And you can also find me over on the TFM network with a bunch of shows. Of course, there is the 602 Club, where we talk about all of those franchises we love outside of Star Trek. And then Chris Jones and I have a bunch of great Star Trek talk over there as well. So, John, though, if people wanted to maybe bounce some ideas off of you about what we're talking about, where could they find you?
Well, gosh, you can find me out there in the wilds of the internet as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. And as we record this, it's spooky season, and I have started watching a whole lot of actually slasher movies and horror movies I've never seen before. So follow me over on Letterboxd. Let's connect over on Letterboxd, because that's my favorite social network. What the heck? And you can find me right here on this podcast network, co-hosting a show with Darren Moser and Tristan Riddell called House Lights, where we look at the work of different directors through the course of their careers, or their careers divided up by decade, what have you. As we record this, we're talking about Robert Zemeckis of the 1990s. So that's a fun time. And Matt, all of that said, I think that we have to go back because they're having a dinner special tonight, Snoke Stew. And I sincerely hope it doesn't have ingredients that come to mind when I say that. So I think it's time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.